Thank you for joining us today. Stenhouse Publishers provides books, digital content, professional development services, and curricular resources by teachers for teachers to help pre-K through 12 educators enhance their professional knowledge and build their students' skills as readers, writers, and thinkers. We are so pleased to have JoEllen McCarthy joining us today. JoEllen is a lifelong learner and staff developer who spends her days facilitating collaborative coaching conversations that support a curriculum of children and emphasize literacy as a vehicle to care. As the Educator Collaborative's Books Ambassador, JoEllen spreads her enthusiasm for the role literature plays in all aspects of education. So we're ready to get started, and at this point, I'll turn the presentation over to JoEllen. Enjoy, everybody.
Thank you, Erica. Hi, everyone. Welcome. It's so great to see so many names of old friends and new friends, and I'm thrilled that people are here on a day when everybody's probably already feeling a little zoomed out to spend some time with me talking about the work that I'm doing and workshopping some of my ideas from Layers of Learning. So thank you for joining. I'm so excited. As Erica said, I have the privilege and honor of being the book ambassador for the elementary, primary, middle school students that we work with at the Educator Collaborative. And for those of you who don't know me, you just know by looking around, I'm a little obsessed with picture books. It is a disease. I'll start off very early on and tell you, I apologize if I cost you money, but I'm going to give a shout out to the wonderful libraries. And today, as part of our conversation, one of the things I want us to really be thinking about is beyond book lists, how we can use books to lift the level of the conversations we're having with our kids. So please feel free to use the chat bar, join the conversation. We have a short amount of time today, but I hope to be able to give you some great ideas that maybe validate what you already do with the power of Read Alouds and maybe some new food for thought. So welcome, we're getting started now. I'm so excited to see the numbers continue to grow, and please feel free to chat up on the side or email me with any questions, comments, etc. So as we continue to discuss layers of learning and thinking about how we use Read Alouds to connect literacy and caring conversations, for those of you who don't know me, I just want to give you a little bit of background. I often introduce myself as a literacy grandmother because I have the privilege and honor of visiting classrooms all across the country, and I get to work alongside and learn from students and teachers every day. They're not my children, therefore I call myself a literacy grandma. One thing that you'll notice is that I am always surrounded by books. Even when I travel in, the real world and I have to bring suitcases of books, yes, I am the person lugging those suitcases. That's one thing that I have to say about COVID that has been a little bit of having an advantage for me, because I get to travel right here across the room to grab a book off the shelf. As you can see, I believe in the power of books as my co-teachers, not just picture books, but professional books and mentor authors. I'm constantly growing my stack, thinking about ways that I can learn and that I can grow, because I am not an expert. I am just a learner. And I hope that by joining me today, you feel the same. And I'm excited to talk a little bit about the work in this book. And I have to give a shout out first to a friend, mentor, illustrator, and phenomenal, talented creator, Catherine Atoshi, is a very good friend of mine. And if you noticed or enjoyed any of the illustrations that are in the contributions of the artwork, that is thanks to Catherine Atoshi. So she and I work together on many projects, have presented together. If you don't know her work, I strongly encourage you to check out Beautiful Hands, the 1, 0, 2, Draw the Line, and she has a new book out on the way in June, which I can tell you a little bit more as we get closer to that date. And Catherine and I had talked back and forth about images that I wanted to represent these ideas about how books are these powerful tools that can help us. And so in going back and forth with Catherine, I explained to her my ideas about how I use books to think through the idea that books first touch us through the knowledge and the experience and the understanding, right? You don't know what you don't know. You read a story, you get to experience something. And through that, it touches not just the head, but the heart, and impacts our feelings, our emotions, our, again, expanding on our understanding. And then hopefully the idea is all of this work with critical thought, with continued conversations, with real caring and concern leads to action, right? If you're familiar with Geneva Gay's work, Geneva Gay was groundbreaking work with culturally responsive sustaining practices. And she said that there's a real difference between caring about, which is really feelings of just concern, and caring for, which moves us to action. And I truly believe that books can help us do that. They can help move us to action. So as we work together and work through some of these ideas, I'm going to share some of what my beliefs are that's led me to this work, and I hope that you'll do the same. So with regards to right now, we're living in a time where we can't all gather around pages of a book. Maybe it's through Zoom, or maybe it's through breakout rooms or Google Classrooms. How are we using books to bring us together? That is my question. So I'm going to share with you, and there's an article that you can read as well about this work, about how important I believe it is to think about books in this way. Think for a moment about some of our classrooms. Right now, COVID, the pandemic, has created environments we're not very used to. And unfortunately, in that way, we really need to be thinking outside the box. And I believe now more than ever, read alouds are the most essential, most powerful tool we have on our shelves. So let's think about the heart work books do. If we consider this for a moment, are we reading books just for pure joy? Are we exposing kids to the beauty and the brilliance of a variety of identities? Are we affirming those identities and cultural ways of being? Are we just enjoying a story together? Are we thinking about how, as we come together, whether it's physically in the same space or not, how can we bring together times where we can talk about and explore all the feels? Because right now we've got lots of those feels, and it's so essential that our kids are thinking about how we can connect not just literacy, but literacy and social emotional learning across the pages and off the pages of a book. So if we think about it, take a moment, think about what are some of the things that you already do with books? What are those experiences or stories that influence your work with read alouds? Who or what has influenced your practice? In the chat bar, you may want to jot a thought or an idea or a comment about perhaps someone that's influenced your work, or professional text, or an experience, because I believe when we share our ideas, that's how we truly grow together. As I mentioned, and I see some of my colleagues from the Educator Collaborative and some colleagues that I work with across the country have joined us today. We grow through learning together and sharing. It's that collective expertise. So please feel free, share with us in the comments on the chat bar or on the notes pages. How are you influenced by the power of read alouds? In what ways have books been tools or vehicles of conversation in your classroom? I'm going to continue because we have such a short amount of time, and feel free to add to the conversation. I'm going to continue talking about this theory, this idea, this practice of learning as heart work. And as I mentioned, I'm workshopping books and ideas from this book, but it's not about the books. It's about the conversations around those books. And this book would not be complete without the vision and visible voice of students. So everything I share today, I share as an invitation to notice and to consider and to take back to your own classroom and think about what are the ways that books help you influence your students in the head, the heart, and the hands. I think we often talk a lot about, writer's craft, and we do noticing charts to notice what a writer has done that we can try. But it's equally powerful and just as important to be looking at books as readers and as life learners. What are those same lessons hidden in the pages, in the craft, in the text, in the images from those books? That's what I hope to offer to you today, and to continue to explore. I see some people bringing up a friend and colleague and another well-respected mentor of mine, Lester Lamanek. You can't talk about read alouds without thinking about the work that Lester has done in this area. And I'm so appreciative for Lester and people like Lester. And there's so many books out there. Again, it's not just the books. It's the individuals and the conversations that we're having around those books. So going back to some thoughts and ideas, another belief I have is I believe in the workshop model. I believe in the workshop model as a method and a mindset. And I think that it also is something that will remind us how we have to be balancing those academic needs with the affective needs. And one way that I do that is using a term called heart print books. In my opinion, every book has the potential to leave a long-lasting mark because the reader writes the story. But think about this for a moment. How are we choosing and selecting and curating our collections of books to reflect these heart prints? Are we considering ideas influenced from people like Rudine Sims Bishop and her work, thinking about how are our books and our shelves reflective of books that serve as windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors? And are we considering the ways that we are using books to explore a variety of voices? And are we amplifying voices to explore experiences that kids can see joy and hardships and different perspectives and everything all wrapped into one? I think that's the most important thing, that we're exploring texts and we're exploring books that are going to leave those marks for our kids, and we're getting them to think about why that is. I am not here to say this is the only book that you should use, although I could clearly grab a book or two and say right now what my absolute favorite heart print book is. And if you follow me on Twitter, you know already, because I can't stop talking about Matt De La Pena and Christian Robinson's book, their newest collaboration, Milo Imagines the World. And just to give you a sneak peek in the back of this book, the dedication page is so powerful because Matt De La Pena says, it's for those who dare to imagine beyond a first impression. We'll come back to books in a moment, but I want to make sure that we're thinking through this idea of choosing and selecting texts that are going to be fitting the needs of our kids as readers, as writers, as life learners. What is the just right text for the just right moment to help with those necessary conversations? That's the question that I like to keep in mind. So going back to this idea, have you thought about heart print books and what that might mean for you? Perhaps this is a moment where you're bursting to share one that's been really powerful that you've used with your kids or your class. Please feel free to jot that in the chat bar as we look through and talk through this a little bit together. Like I mentioned Milo, but another book that we have to consider right now is this book by Lei Win Pham, Outside Inside, which really is like a time capsule for this moment, thinking about the ways our world has changed and having the opportunity to talk with kids about the way that we see what's going on right now, but we'll learn from this. And we'll also think about the ways that, through what she says in this book is how the world came together in a moment in history. And there's painful times and there's good times, but we need to be reflective of all of that because that's how we learn. That's how change happens. Unfortunately, too often we look at systemic racism and the ongoing troubles in our world. We need to make a difference, and that happens by starting with our kids and what we can control in our classroom. Are we having conversations to look at and reflect on anti-racist texts and anti-racist work? And thinking about that, are we looking at books that even celebrate families and family structures and just the beauty and the diversity of universal love that comes in all shapes and sizes? These are some of the things that I like to consider for that communal bonding around books, those book bonds. Okay, so let's go back a little bit and let's talk about this. I keep talking about these books that I love, and I want to mention that SLJ has a fabulous list of publishers' policies right now, so that if you do choose to record, to share something through your Google Classroom or to make available on your school webpage, you have permissions from publishers that are really helpful so that we can share books and get kids access to books. Or we might look at digital texts and virtual libraries. There's a great article also by SLJ that looks at the power of curating collections in a digital world. And you'll see there's a shout out to my friend Claire Landrigan, who has a wonderful resource of books and digital bins where you can access books for free. This is a sample that I've also put together for you, where you click on different resources and you'll be able to see, like here, if I click on Milo Imagines the World, we'll get to see a quick little book trailer and get kids excited. So I'll share that with you for a moment. If it decides to go.
Milo sees the world around him and imagines the world he can't see. Sometimes it's beautiful. Sometimes it's not. Is the world really the way that Milo imagines it? What do other people imagine about Milo? Discover that we have more in common than we could ever imagine.
Oops.
In Milo Imagines the World.
Well, it's a good thing that we all have the opportunity to have those moments, like the real moments that are happening in our classroom when something doesn't work and tech doesn't work. I promise you, when you click on that video, you will get to see the book trailer of Milo Imagines the World. And I apologize. I promise I will try that one more time and see if it goes. And if it doesn't, that's my fault. And it will be on the resources that you get to share. So here we go. Let's see. Is it showing?
Milo sees the world around him and imagines the world he can't see. Sometimes it's beautiful. Sometimes it's not. Is the world really the way that Milo imagines it? What do other people imagine about Milo? Discover that we have more in common than we could ever imagine. In Milo Imagines the World.
Thanks for those of you who were able to let me know that wasn't working. Typical in the moment, real live teaching, right? So anyway, when you think about this idea of digital bins and digital resources, we have the opportunity to let kids see, oops, sorry, I was trying to share the PowerPoint again. Let kids see what exists in books that they might get excited about reading or they may want to share. And at the same time, there are wonderful, generous authors who have materials out there where they provide the entire book being read themselves. And so are we thinking about, I hear it texting. That might mean there's a problem. Are we thinking about the ways that we're using books to create a space to have these conversations? And so we're fortunate to have books that can shine a light on, inclusive communities and cultures. And are we maybe thinking about the books that are on our shelves and how we've revisited to maybe do an audit? Like, I love books that celebrate identity and books that we can talk about for celebrating names. And so when we think about that, we may come to mind with a book like Chrysanthemum, which I use as an example because kind of everyone knows Kevin Henkes, but how about an Always Anjali? Or how about Your Name is a Song by Jamila Tompkins Bigelow? And by the way, this book came out after I published Layers of Learning. And I think it's really important to know that I'm always changing and adding to my collection of resources because I want kids to be just excited about the books that are out there. So when you're doing this work, it's not thinking about, oh, I need that book that JoEllen said. It's I need books that are going to help us as we're trying to affirm identity and culture and experience, or family structures, or agency, or, many of the things I call the care elements, because for me, it was a framework to wrap my head around. But if you read the book and you're following along, or some of the work that's in there, I'm really intentional in saying some of these books can fit across these categories. It's not to say that Always Anjali is a book that I would label for community, because this is a book that celebrates identity. And identity is, yes, one of the first steps in affirming and celebrating community, how we can acknowledge our differences, our unique qualities, and celebrate that. But it's just as powerful in conversations about respect or empowerment. And so when we think this way, are we asking ourselves with the intention and purpose to be able to put a book in the hands of our kids? Because as Matt De La Peña said, you know, the books are really powerful, yes, but the physical books and the words do not come to life until the conversations that happen around them. So I hope that we think about this as we're choosing and selecting. And I'm thrilled and honored if you enjoy some of the ideas that I've put in this book for you to adopt or adapt. But I'm more excited about the work that you're doing in these types of settings where we're pulling and checking and thinking through how and why we're using books and for what our purpose is and how that might change day to day based on what's happening. There's so many beautiful books in the world, and it's a tough decision. It's a complex decision about which books I'm going to use because our world is complex. And so I encourage you to change and think about that and think about the why and not just a book list. So back to this theory, this idea, this practice that I hope I'm giving you some food for thought about. When we talk through how books invite conversations, and I said a little bit, here's another book that deals with names, Alma and how she got her name. And I love that book because we also can see the beauty and the traditions of her culture. And Juana Martinez Mia thinking about how in that book and the images and the illustrations and the story can inspire kids to, like Anjali or Your Name is a Song, think through how they have those names or their names and where they came from. Or The King of Kindergarten, which looks at, you know, someone who's just confident and happy and thrilled and celebrates Black boy joy and can get kids thinking in a positive light for mindset about starting school. And at the same time, we can have a conversation like Alina's Shoes Are Nervous, which is by Keith Calabresi and Juana Medina, and we can talk about anxieties and feelings. And if you don't know that book, I just have to tell you what I love about that book is that the little girl in the story says, I'm fine. I'm so excited to start school. It's great. I can't wait. There's just one little problem. And her family's like, what's the problem? And she says, my shoes are nervous. And I love that book so much. Number one, again, let's think literacy and writer's craft. Okay, great. We've got personification. We've got dialogue. We've got all of that. But let's think about the SEL layer in there, right? For self-awareness, self-management, understanding that we all have anxieties and fears, and that's okay. And what's more okay and what's more powerful is that we're having the conversations about that, and books help us do this work. So, as you can tell, I get a little excited about books, sorry to say. And there's lots and lots of examples in there, but don't forget, we've got free resources like Epic, we've got the digital bins, we've got Libby, or, you know, formerly Overdrive. We've got great resources like First Book, where we can get some very inexpensive text in the hands of our kids. We've got Kidlit TV, which has some fabulous resources, again, read alouds, ready-made, of authors and illustrators that are professionally done, not infringing upon copyright, that can bring those authors into our classrooms. And these are the things that really make a difference. So let's talk about this work and let's give some examples. So consider this. Take a look at Duck Rabbit, which I'm sharing with you with permissions from Chronicle Books. If you don't know this one, it's Amy Krauss Rosenthal and Tom Lichtenheld. And I want you to take a moment and just in the chat bar, jot down, what do you see? Do you see a duck or a rabbit? And I swear if there was more time, we'd analyze this because there's like a right brain, left brain situation going on here. Teachers often see the same things. You'll see, watch as it starts coming through. It's very funny to see. What do you see first, I should say? Because yes, hopefully you do see both. That's an illustrated point with this text that I love so much. Look at all the rabbits. So funny, so funny. I love it. Yeah, so think about this for a second. We talk to kids about texts as readers and as writers, but when we stop for a moment and think about how we can have connected lessons where we're thinking about reading and writing and life, think about the layers that exist in this book. So if kids are saying, I see a duck or I see a rabbit, well, how about what do you see and why? Could you tell me more about that? Could you share your thinking? Could you tell me a little bit about what you noticed? Because we don't all see the same things, and that's okay. And we can have a really complex conversation about perspective and experience, and then we can talk to kids about how important it is to listen to one another, to take turns, and to hear and learn from others' perspectives. Like some of you were so determined to say, I saw a duck or I saw a rabbit. But then when we look at this book, think about the reciprocity here again. Like no matter what you see, the illustrator has done something really intentional. And with that new piece of evidence, we now can clearly see a duck because the bread makes it look like the duck is about to eat a piece of bread. Or on this page, look at that piece of evidence. And I do this with young kids. I'll say, look and point and say, why are you thinking that? What are you noticing? And something so simple can illustrate the point that when you're writing today, we just did it as readers, but when you're writing today, could you go back to your text and could you add some more with your pictures or your words to help your reader clearly see what you were trying to say? Because that's the reciprocity of reading and writing. So as a reader, I notice this image. As a writer, I'm going to add images to my text. And then it's kind of like that aha moment. So we get that, we see it both, right? And so we have to think about how we want to work smarter and not harder as we're doing this with our kids. And so maybe it's not just about Duck Rabbit, not just about reading, not just about writing, but how about the life lesson in there? Like, what do you think Amy Krauss Rosenthal wanted us to learn or understand or know more about? Like, how does that pertain to life? So we don't all see things the same. The reader writes the story, right? Perspective, all of that layered into then the conversation. Like when you choose the book, don't just be thinking about the reading strategy or the writing strategy. I want it to be more responsive. Yes, and, right? So yes, and let's go back and let's talk about what we notice that's going to help us educate not just the head, but the heart and the hands. Like how does this impact our relationships, our self-awareness? Or how are we able to have conversations in our classroom about accepting others' ideas or about being aware about appreciating other ideas and being open to also critically analyze texts in a way that maybe we didn't do before, but now we know we should. So here's a higher level example of that for you with the book, They All Saw a Cat. Hopefully the video shows. If it doesn't, I'll listen for the dings. I'm going to stop it there just in the interest of time because it says this fall. The book's been out for a while by Brendan Wenzel. And I just love this book because it's such a great example of how we need to consider perspective and bias and how prior knowledge and experience or lack thereof shapes what we see. And so you have kids who now can have really, really complex conversations off the pages of this book of thinking about a text. Like if you look at the page with the mouse, and it's such a clear example to think about, look at how the mouse views that cat and how one has to consider in a text based on a character, an event, or dialogue, what that is helping you or leading you to believe because of that experience, right? And so we can start to consider who has privilege, who has power, and what leads us to this conversation is looking first through images with this critical lens and then text and analyzing and unpacking and having kids get into deeper level conversations around this work. And so that they do this and they do this in a picture book, like They All Saw a Cat or anything else where they can discuss, gender norms or family structures or anything and start to analyze in this way. When they do this with more complex text that doesn't have illustrations to support or doesn't have simple text to support that work, they're more comfortable and they're ready to do it because it's those routines that we establish coming together for a heart start or a morning meeting or being able to think through, meant to hit the wrong thing. Think through the ways the reader writes the story. And, consider, if you're following along the book, I have some charts in there that kind of explain a little bit more about this reciprocity and give us some open-ended ways of thinking about looking at books, because I'm not here to say there's only one way. I'm certainly not here to say that there's only one answer. I want us to think with more depth for every text that we pick up. Think about this and how we can consider these layers with our kids, and let our kids offer for us what they're thinking, what they're, even misunderstandings and why. And that's the discussion possibilities, right? These student-led meetings are these discussion possibilities where we get to lean in and listen. And so right now it may be breakout rooms or appointments or small groups in Google Classrooms, but when we do this work, are we providing an invitation for kids to notice, to question, to wonder? It really is as simple as picking up the powerful read aloud and letting the books and the kids do the work. So in my book, I talk about the 3 C's, and I talk about this because I think about people who've influenced my work. And that would be like Debbie Miller or Stephanie Harvey, or, thinking about work with connections. Chris Tovani, who I know has a great new book out with Stenhouse as well. She does work with middle and secondary. She did something years ago that I remember using again and again with my students, like getting past the so what connections, right? And so I started playing with that idea and thinking about something really simple. I'm not going to give a list of questions, but instead I want to have a framework when we pick up a book to think about connections to the cares and the concerns, and giving kids this framework to consider the ways that maybe, they have to first stop and talk about what they care about. Like I could pick up Your Name Is a Song or Anjali again, and I could say, I have some connections because I have a name like JoEllen. I haven't really met a lot of JoEllens. So I get that. I get that names can be different and names can be unique. But what I care about is that, I want people to feel really embraced by that uniqueness. I want people to be respected. And that is important to me. What I'm concerned about, what would move me to action, what would move me to do something more, is when I think about the kids who are not so mindful or respectful of different names or different anything for that matter. And so when we give kids the opportunity to think along those lines, we're presenting some possibilities. We're not giving them a question with a right answer. We're giving them some questions to think about, some framework to kind of shape the conversations that they have. And powerful stuff happens. So going back to this idea and thinking about, right now, what life is like, maybe it's a Jamboard. Maybe you're using Jamboards to ask kids to share their thoughts, their questions, their comments. There's 3 C's, or maybe it's Padlet. There's lots of ways to do this work. And what we need to consider is, are we using questions like keys? Because the right question at the right time will open the door to something we don't yet know or something you haven't yet realized. I love that. And again, if you're following along in the book, not that you have to be, but if you are following along in the book, in pages 35 to 36, I have like a variety of open-ended questions and ideas to invite those connections and those conversations. And my hope is, if you are looking at this work and considering doing this work, that we're thinking about some of the staples. And for me, some of the staples are start with a heart print book, one that you've chosen because it feels just right in the moment. It's something you're looking to support, your students as readers, writers, and as humans. And then start the discussion possibilities. Let the kids lean in, listen, and invite them for those 3 C's to have those conversations. And then we can layer in all the other craft. So I'll show you, for example, some of the framework, thinking about the invitation to notice. Those literacy layers sort of come naturally, right? We might be thinking about units of study, and this work supports and complements teaching points and workshops, and some unit of study work. But we can layer in those continuing connections and extend the possibilities. So I'm going to show some examples and hopefully give you more food for thought in our very brief time together. And I hope that you'll consider, continuing the conversation with me and continuing this work, because there is an opportunity to do so. I think we could probably do, multiple multiple workshops on this work, but it really doesn't become powerful until it's representative of the ideas and the thoughts that your students are bringing to these pages. So, as I mentioned, a framework for me is thinking around these ideas, not to say that any one book fits in a category. I am hugely offended when I hear people say, well, this book is for empathy. Empathy, agency, all of that, it's all wrapped up in one. And all of that is like part of the spine of a book, if you would. We can't just say, oh, here's a book that's for this or for that. We have to be thinking instead about the ways that we use text. Like you'll notice I'm really intentional in not saying a diverse book, because I want to be thinking about using texts that have a variety of inclusive examples of the array of beauty and diversity that exists in our world. If I say this is a diverse text, I'm now othering someone or some group, and that's problematic. So being mindful of, having a framework for thoughts around books, and again, asking kids to tell them, what do you think about this and why? So if we go back to this idea and some of the ideas in the book, just to give you some more thoughts, as you're choosing and selecting text, as you're curating collection, think about a curriculum of children, not holidays. This speaks to the same point. We think about histories and months, and no one person or group should be, confined to a month. Like celebrating Black history all year long because of the beauty and the contributions of people from Black history is American history. And so it's really doing a disservice to kids to only study particular areas or particular content. We need to have these connections all year long, and we need to amplify the voices for those who have not been well represented in our history or in our classrooms, for that matter. So thinking about that, I've got some examples which give you some food for thought. So when we talk about community, I already said Always Anjali. I said Your Name is a Song. More thoughts, I Am Every Good Thing. If you don't know Derek Barnes' work, he did The King of Kindergarten as well, and The Crown. But there's this idea that we share a text, we have some discussion possibilities, and then maybe we do some literacy work so that our halls and walls start to teach and share these messages. So for example, you'll see kids in the top right corner sharing their names and celebrating their names while also celebrating letter sounds. And then older students doing I am poems inspired by the refrain and the text and the repetition and the craft in I Am Every Good Thing. But mind you, this is just as easily a lesson in empowerment. So more ideas. Agency, as I said, thinking about agency, thinking about self-management and understanding, and how stories can serve as recruiters. Agency, empathy, activism, again, all connected. What are the things we think of Portabelpre, and we think about planting stories, and we think about how we can learn about a powerful librarian, or we can think about someone who, was really, really influential in bringing books from multiple languages and experiencing the need to have kids experience stories that come from a variety of cultures, or an ABC of Equality, or a new text, Voices of Justice, which is a variety of poems that Georgia Ella Lyon collected. How about thinking about respect? Of course, Milo in there, and thinking about how we have to be mindful of those initial perceptions. Or how about something like Jacob's Room to Choose, which is a follow-up. Hopefully it looks familiar to some of you from Jacob's Dress, where that is a story that recognizes a child's wanting to be comfortable in choosing what bathroom to use, and having a conversation with kids about looking for the elements in a story that help you learn more about character and understanding and experiencing, again, the head, the heart, and the hands. Or empowerment, like I love a few of these new ones on the bottom. Dictionary for a Better World's been out for a while, but Eyes That Kiss in the Corners, or I Can Write the World. I mean, if we had more time, I would probably stop and read every one of these books to you. But I just think that when we find those books that are so powerful, and we find those books that really touch our students' hearts, they leave that lasting impression. And I think that it's a beautiful, wonderful thing. So, we are going to have time for questions in a few minutes. I just want to kind of reiterate what I said. I have a tendency to get excited about books. I apologize. It's a disease. I was saying before that in addition to the collection that has taken many years and many dollars, and there are many library books up there too, by the way. This used to be my kids' playroom. And when they got older, and as soon as I could, I said to my husband, I need to turn that into an office because we were tripping over books. I'd come home from working in a different building every day, and I'd have my suitcase, I'd unpack, and there you go. It would be all over the house. So this is one place that I have collected books and continue to collect books, but I had to set up a table today because I said, oh, I want to be able to grab, like, I Can Write the World by Hoshanda Sanders, which is so beautiful and so gorgeous. And just if you look at this page, this was illustrated by Charlie Palmer. Charlie Palmer, talks about how creativity is using what you have to make a map of your dreams. What you see in your mind or feel in your heart can come out in dance, colors, or beats. And I did an interview with Hoshanda, and she talked about how Ava Murray got her name. And I would encourage you to check out the BTB Behind the Book Story interviews, because that's another way to add a layer. What did you learn from the individual who gifted us with this story? So we're going to talk a little bit about some more ways to curate your collections and hopefully get excited about not just books, but beyond book lists. So here's a really simple example. If you don't have that reading advisor, you don't have that crazy person who's always talking your ear off about books, check out the book list of award-winning books, but check out the why. So for example, Carol Boston Weatherford, if you don't know, just won the Coretta Scott King Award with Frank Morrison, again, to celebrate the book that they wrote about Aretha Franklin's life. And she has a variety, Carol Boston Weatherford, of biographies, as you saw on that screen, that celebrate agents of change and really beautiful individuals, most often contributing to our history that happen to be people of color, a celebration of beauty and art in her work together, which might lead you, if you don't know this book about Aretha, to find out more about Carol or Frank Morrison. And this book, The Roots of Rap, is amazing. This was a collaboration they did a few years ago that also is another testament to hip hop and the power of hip hop, which leads to poetry, which leads to beautiful writing, which just leads to so much. And so when we are, kind of searching on that path, it's not about a book, it's books that will lend to themselves to this work. So I've encouraged you to think about not just the text, but are we looking at the awards and what does that award represent? And how does that influence then what I'm thinking about when I share that text? Like the Schneider Award, which looks at, kids that are struggling with different abilities in a text and their experience, or the Portabelpre Award, which celebrates the Latinx experience. And so thinking through those texts and then maybe having kids go in search of their own version of winners that represent those stories and those ideas and those awards, right? Some of us have done mock Caldecots for that reason, which is a powerful thing. And so in my last few ideas or tips to take away, I want you to think about how it's not about the books. Of course, in my book, I give several examples in part 2, but just this framework I think is powerful. An invitation to share connection, cares, and concerns with any book, a discussion possibilities. Think about those 3 C's. Maybe start kids off with a few ideas. Like, for example, with Anjali, these are all real samples from real kids and work that I'm doing in classrooms across the country. And so if it's in there, it's because it's been effective to have these conversations. But I want to hear from you. What are the texts that you use? What are some of the discussion possibilities that you've had? What are some of the things that your kids have come up with? And when you tie it to your literacy connections, I would encourage you to think about those as possibilities for nurturing readers and writers, okay? Because it's not about a script. It's not about a teaching point that's, a mini lesson or a mandate. It's an invitation. Here's something we can try. As a reader, you might want to think about this. As a writer, you might want to try to do that. First and foremost, are we having powerful conversations around the book? And then how can we then really work smarter by layering in and going back and revisiting a text to really celebrate the wonderful qualities in there that will influence us as readers and writers. So we've given you an example from the book with the Portabelpre text, and just to show you a little bit more about the structure, if you're interested, is, again, food for thought, ideas you can adopt or adapt. Once you've done those literacy connections, think about literacy snapshots. How can you take that work outside of the text to celebrate maybe your students using their art, their words, or their actions to try to make the world a better place? Maybe we can continue by layering other texts that help us have those same conversations. Or better yet, let's look at a video or a resource or a TED Talk or a professional article that's going to help us do this work and continue the conversation. Because learning is never about one idea and then being done. It's about the ongoing work that we do to build those ideas and to grow our collective expertise. So I am going to stop for questions. The last picture that I have in here that I wanted to share with you is about, thinking through the ways that your experiences are influencing your halls and your walls. How are we connecting SEL and equity into your literacy space? How might you use Read Alouds to inspire students to be agents of change? In what ways might you use stories to extend these conversations? Hopefully, I'm giving you food for thought. And remember, beyond the book and behind the book, you can find out more which will inspire your kids. Look at the dedication page. Look at the author's websites. Go to interviews they've done. Check out podcasts. Check out their social media handles. There's layers and layers and layers to go deeper. One thing I'm really excited about is the Behind the Book series of interviews. I mentioned it, and just to give you a little sneak peek of what it looks like, I was inspired by pop-up videos. Now I'm really going to give away my age here, but for those of you who don't know, pop-up videos, the the pop-up videos from VH1. I'm such a geek. You could see what a geek I am in the thing. I was so excited to interview Jamila, and she told me some behind the scenes stories that then will translate to things you can do with your kids. I am a nerd, Joshua. I'm a total nerd, and I admit it. I am a proud nerd. But I'm very fortunate in the work that I do as the educator collaborative book ambassador. I get to interview authors all the time. I get to work and present with authors and illustrators all the time. So I've had this opportunity to now do these interviews, and Stenhouse has been kind enough to support this work. So you can then bring those authors and illustrators into your classroom. So if you don't know Jamila Tompkins Bigelow's work, you can share that video. I've also interviewed Charles Smith Jr. I just started it recently. So we did, and Nate's on this chat, so he could probably join in. We did Charles Smith Jr. We did Emma Otegi recently, who just did A Sled for Gabo, which is absolutely beautiful and also celebrates, this young Latinx boy. And what he brings to the story is he is someone who has moved and is unfamiliar with snow, but he's celebrating all that he has to offer to his community in this moment. It's not an issue book that, oh, he didn't know the snow. It's all the things he can bring to celebrate his culture and share that with his community. And it's kind of like this beautiful collection and collaboration. So we did an interview together with I did an interview with Emma as well. And those are the kinds of things that when you can share that with your kids, it takes the conversation to the next level. I am interviewing Matt De La Pena about Milo in 2 weeks. I can't wait. I'm so excited. I am a geek. It's a problem. It is a big problem, and I apologize. But I'm going to stop talking now, and I'm going to invite you to share your thoughts, answer some of the questions I've already posed, and maybe encourage you to think through some ideas that perhaps validate what you already do with Read Alouds, or maybe have given you some new food for thought.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to pop back in to read some questions from our Q&A as well.
Thank you.
Sure. So we have one question that popped up. Can you provide a book list of the books that you spoke about?
Okay, so I will tell you that in this book, there are 60 full-fledged ideas of connections. I won't call them lessons, because if you were listening, I was talking about like this invitation to notice. And so in the book, you'll see probably over 200 texts mentioned, but it's not a book list. It's just supposed to be, like this idea that will hopefully get people started in thinking through the ways they use books. So I would be honored if people wanted to find out more and check out some of those titles, but know that every book list I've ever created is always changing. So as I said, Always Anjali is an example. Here's Your Name is a Song. You'll find 200 titles in here if that's what you're looking for. And I hope that it's helpful, but I would also encourage you to share the titles that are meaningful to your kids and have worked for you, because that list is always changing.
Thanks, JoEllen. We have a couple more that popped up.
Sure.
So Heather asked, when you look at a book, can you talk us through what you look for?
So yeah, if we go back to the idea of heart print books, which is something that I, have tried to focus on, that's the term that I've, kind of chosen as an explanation. I think about, texts that help kids relate to learning about themselves and others in the world. And I kind of went to cheat and look at the page, because in the book, there's a whole page where I talk about this. And I talk about, are we looking to use texts that have rich language, or texts that maybe can help kids examine the impact of the illustration and the artistic techniques, or the word choice, or perhaps think about, how is a text sharing or influencing acts of justice, or how might that text just simply touch your heart in an indescribable way. Like, I'm the person who watches a Hallmark commercial and is probably crying, but I read a book and sometimes there are tears, and kids that I work with see those tears. So if it just touches you in a certain way, and as I say, the reader writes the story. So every text is going to be different for every reader. One thing to be really mindful of is to think about how books can help dispel prejudices and build community. And there's a quote in this book that I love that, is not from me, but a woman by the name of Hazel Rockman, who said, books can do this work, not with role models and recipes, not with noble messages, but with stories that make us imagine the lives of others.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Kayla asked, what are some recommendations you have for books about friendship?
So this is a great book that's brand new. And what I love about the, I try to share the newer titles that people will know as well, because I think what's great about this is the celebration of language and the beauty of language. There's translanguaging in here, so kids can see English and Spanish, and talks about the friendships that he's made. And I just, that's one that comes to mind. But I happen to be a real fan of using texts that look at realistic fiction. So if you were to look at some of the titles that I've suggested, there are some great nonfiction titles in there as well, but you'll find a lot that deal with friendships and community and, again, identity as well.
Great. We have another question too. How do you feel about book levels when reading a read aloud?
So I'm really, really very, very vocal about saying that it's about book love and lives and not levels. So I would be someone that you would probably want to have a further conversation beyond just now about the importance of recognizing, Stephen Lane's work. He talks about how we can use read alouds and get kids to listen up. But I think there's a real danger when we start labeling levels and saying, well, I'm only going to read this because it's this level and this is going to work. I want to think about the book that's going to be that just right text in the just right moment.
Great. I also see one question that came through in the chat. From Nancy, can you give us some names of books written by kids? My students love reading about that.
Yeah, you know what? I have a few on my shelf over there, and I can email Nancy because those names, the kids' names are not coming to my mind right away, but I know that there are several books that have been published before. Like there's one about trying to get it's like almost like a how-to that's by Alec Reven. That was a student, and he has a whole series of books. And then there's some other books that have been published by classes that were put together and then published by Scholastic that have a representation of real kids doing this work, and they're really powerful and great models for kids. And I see someone put in there for toddler time. I mentioned one book that happens to be a board book, but I was saying when we were planning for this, I do this work with pre-K, I do this work with high school. And so, you know, if you're interested and you want to know more, we can certainly set up some, you know, possible next steps or next workshops even, where we could get that specific to support, you know, content areas or pre-K or, you know, just making the connections across the, you know, again, a curriculum of children first and foremost, but really trying to be specific and helpful to help with the needs that you need, that you have.
That's great. Thank you. That's everything that came through question-wise so far.
Okay.
Big
I
thank
know.
you, JoEllen. I just want to tell everyone, first of all, thank you to everyone who made time to be here today and to join us. Go check out Layers of Learning on stenhouse.com. There's a book preview up there. You can get a little sneak peek. JoEllen briefly mentioned, but she does a lot of staff development. So she can customize PD to your needs and your grade levels. And we will share her contact information in the follow-up email that will go out after the webinar. Just a reminder that email will hit your inbox within 48 hours, and it will have a link to this recording, JoEllen's contact info, and all of the links and resources that she shared today. It will also have the code that we popped in the chat earlier for 10% off of Layers of Learning.
I did have one other slide that I didn't get to share, and I think it's important. And I, if you don't mind, I just want to share this really quickly, because I think that, you know, as we're considering this work, my colleague, Julia Torres, who, if you are not familiar with Julia's work, she's one of the founding members of Disrupt Text, which is really, again, another opportunity to think about how we are reflective of the texts that we use and why we're using them to kind of push back and away from disrupting, you know, disrupting the canon, because some texts are in schools just because they always have been, and they really, it's time to change. So when you're thinking about finding texts, you know, you want to find reading advisors you can trust. You can want to look to some of these websites and resources and, you know, research not only the kids, but research books, read, reflect, and repeat. And so I've left you with those sources as well that you can find. And I know someone just asked about toddlers. Rise is actually an imprint from Penguin that is specifically dealing with young pre-K and individuals of that age group. So it's got some great resources as well. So, you know, think about it when you're doing this work. Try this with your colleagues or alone. Consider the ways you're using books as a reader, as a writer, as a life learner, and you know, your lists will be growing as you curate your collections. So that's hopefully the thoughts that I'm leaving you with. And if you have questions, you can contact me. As Carly said, my email below. You can follow me on Twitter and share. If you're reading Layers of Learning, I hope that you're enjoying it. If you're not and you want to try it, and check it out and let me know your thoughts. So thanks for joining for today. Thanks for having me, Stenhouse. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.